Alice. Okay. Mark Lister asks, can you discuss the economic consideration driving Zionists, example, gas fields off Gaza, proposed Ben Gurion shipping canal, and how this should help inform our resistance to Zionism? And the second question from Tom Baker, how do you explain the wide difference between young people and those over 34 years of age in respect to support for Palestine? Okay, so you each have up to 4 minutes if you want to answer one or both of these questions. So go ahead, we'll start with Barry.
Yes, it is. Okay, terrific. Good questions. The economic considerations compete with political considerations in this matter. It's true that when the Zionist state was formed as a function of the disposition of the so-called British Mandate by the United Nations, the major Western backers were concerned about protecting for Britain the the enjoyment of the Suez Canal. It's a major commercial artery. Now there's talk about building a new canal, across the Sinai. And so the lack of cooperation or disruption potentially by Palestinian people in that region is, of course, a factor that keeps some rich people up late at night, not sleepless, but late. Oil, of course, in the region is paramount. This does not help the transition to a sustainable green future, but nonetheless, oil is used and will be used for a few more years anyway, to a large degree. And the need for a Zionist state was a function of the desire to have a bastion of Western imperialism in the oil-rich Middle East, and it continues to be a consideration to hold down Iran. Israel is the counterweight for the West. There was a piece in the Star that I saw this one. Little chance we'll see an oil embargo. This was just 2 or 3 days ago, and there's a reference to a meeting that took place in mid-October to discuss an oil boycott. You'll remember that 40 years ago there was a worldwide oil boycott, and that was materially related to the Palestinian question. But when Iran's foreign minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian called for Islamic countries to boycott Israel, he did not have many backers in the region, although the Persian Gulf supplies virtually no oil to Israel. Later on November 11th, during a joint Arab League and OIC summit in Jeddah, some member countries, including Algeria and Lebanon, proposed to stop oil supplies to Israel and also its allies. That's the important issue there, the allies, as well as answering the economic and diplomatic ties that some Arab nations have with Israel. Diplomats reportedly said no to that proposition. At least 3 countries, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, which normalized ties with Israel in 2020, and now Saudi Arabia is normalizing its relations with Israel, are going to nix any move. This again underlines the fact that the bourgeoisie in the region has interests diametrically opposed to the freedom struggle of the Palestinians. And so you have to talk about anti-capitalist change if we're going to see freedom for all the peoples of the entire region, including the Palestinians. It will come at the expense of capitalist property relations, or it will not occur. Young people in Zionism. Why are young people more open to anti-Zionism? Well, I mean, it's there have been generations of propaganda that have found a place in the minds of older people, and young people are less jaded and less indoctrinated. And that's the hope. That's the hope for the future. And that's why we are seeing so many people in the streets And not just in the streets, but even, the Giller Prize, the literary prize, was disrupted by young people who were at the awards presentation and who demanded a voice. And, the same has happened at Union Station and at the corner of Yonge and Bloor by independent Jewish voices, and many other actions that have occurred in many other places, and not just the decoration of the Indigo bookstore, which deserves it, not because Heather Reisman is Jewish, but because she is a big sponsor of an Israeli military recruitment operation or reward operation for Israeli lone soldiers in the region.
Yeah, I guess maybe I could touch on the other question about, at least from a Palestine perspective, I think it's interesting, like within the first 20 years that after the Nakba in 1948, I think it took a long time for Palestinians just to be able to speak out. I don't think people understand how traumatic it is for people to be disrooted from their land, villainized, criminalized in every single way. And I say this, but until now, actually, even 2021, I really start to see, I had Palestinian friends from childhood who came out to me as Palestinian. That was just, they come out to me as queer before they came out to me as Palestinian. And that was just like, if that doesn't speak to like the degree, even as Palestinians, and also, we've seen different strategies, we've seen a more militant strategy in like the 60s from, Palestinian guerrilla groups than we saw, in the Oslo period, like, okay, we're trying this kind of two-state solution, let's try to get some rights for our people. And then we realize, again, they're still taking our land. So I see a big difference actually in our community that a lot of the young Palestinians are rejecting the PA. And they're seeing the Palestinian government as highly collaborative with the Israeli regime, which I completely agree with. And also, yeah, I think we're seeing across Palestine now, so many of the youth are mobilized. And yeah, I agree with you. I think other than Palestinians, like people are just learning more about Palestine, and we're able to challenge the mainstream propaganda. Like, fine, the news won't cover it, but who cares? Like, who watches news anymore? Right now, social media is able to get our voice out there. Palestinians, they've been doing so much scholarly and journalist work, putting our bodies on the line. So it's having an impact, yeah. And the other question was about economic considerations, yeah. So I'm not too much of an expert in this area. I think it's so important to always look at the economic impact. So even I just explained how, October's olive harvest season, and like Israeli settlers have been really just, they always attack us in olive harvest season, but this year, like a lot, even they killed one Palestinian just for her harvesting his olives. But we have to recognize that for a lot of, Palestinians historically are largely farmers, and until now, a lot of Palestinians, they rely on that harvest for their livelihood for the year. So we can't ignore how they're trying, to dispossess us economically and take advantage when they literally steal our olives and our machinery. That being said, I view colonialism as largely an issue of white supremacy. I think a lot of the actions that Israel does are motivated by white supremacy rather than capitalism. I've seen them take actions that I don't think are like even economically savvy, but yeah, that's just something I wanted to point out. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go back to questions, and each participant has up to 3 minutes. And our next question will come from Gary Porter online, and then we'll go to Julius, who's in the room, and then to Eric, who's online. So we're going to take 3 questions this time. So please, panelists, if you have pen and paper, write them down if there are questions and not just interventions. Gary?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I was very pleased to hear the history. I've never quite heard it in that much detail, and I think it's a story that puts pay to the whole propaganda of the state of Israel and of Zionism, because now they want us to believe that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and Zionism is anti-Semitism, the truth be told. So that's one thing. I have a question about the leaders. Barry made some comments about how the leadership in the Arab states are tied by 1,000 threads to imperialism. And but is there any chance that movements in those countries can push their leaders into something more substantial in support of the Palestinian people? Because clearly they have the economic and political power to do so. They even have military power. Let's face it, Turkey is a powerful military state, one of the most powerful in Europe, and Iran has engineers and military scientists who have produced some of the best missiles and other weapons in the world. So, you know, they could step up and actually make it clear that if Israel doesn't stop it, they will join the struggle. Is there any hope of the people of those countries pushing their leadership? At least if the people did push, they would expose the leadership as not being supporters of Palestinian liberation or anybody's liberation. So I guess I'm interested in the whole struggle within the Arab country, the Arab world.
No, we're going to ask some more. Sorry, but I just want to try to get everybody in, comrade. Julius. Yes.
Okay. Well, so Julius R. Scott, a member of Socialist Action on the Central Committee and also an executive board member of OPSU. So I kind of wanted to, I don't really have a question, it's more of a sort of report back of the big success that took place at the Ontario Federation of Labor Convention. So I've been a Palestine solidarity activist since I joined SA, so about 15 years. And throughout that time, you know, we've been involved in the movement whenever we can. I've brought multiple BDS resolutions to my own union to get it adopted. Fortunately, it has not happened. But I'll say that, and I ran for a candidate, I was a Workers' Action Movement candidate for Secretary Treasurer of the OFL. This OFL convention, I've never been to any convention within the workers' movement in Canada where Palestine was so prominent. Like not even close. Between people wearing keffiyehs, people wearing Palestine flag buttons on their lapels, and I'm talking about the chairs at the meetings here, right? We're talking about the top officers, to staff. It was overwhelming, and frankly, it's somebody who's been involved for a little while here. It was surreal. There was an establishment slate of candidates. I ran against Ahmed Gaid, who's the incumbent, and both of us supported Palestine. In fact, Ahmed, to his credit, spent about 10 minutes in his Secretary Treasurer's report talking about Palestine, which was a really incredible thing to witness by anyone in the leadership of the workers' movement. So there certainly is a change in the winds in this country and around the world. I guess, yeah, I don't know. Maybe, you know, I've been so captivated by what's been going on. You know, even last year, I brought forward a BDS resolution to my union and I organized around it. And as per usual, you know, the resolutions committee and the powers, I would say the powers that be, because we have had a substantial shift in our leadership in my union. But essentially, the resolution was blocked. They didn't want to have this discussion at our convention from the membership. And when the resolution came back to our leadership, the executive board, and I'm on the board, you know, it was deferred back. It's up to the membership to decide. So the issue kept getting kicked back and forth. But, you know, considering the resolution that was adopted at the OFL convention, which essentially was the QP Ontario resolution, the key element, I mean, it's a pro-Palestine resolution, but the last and the most important bullet point is that the OFL calls on affiliates to educate their members on what's happening to Palestinians, which is massive, right? I mean, this is happening at the heels of everyone being concerned about Fred Hahn and what's going to happen to Fred Hahn, who's the president of QP Ontario, because he was being under attack for his support in organizing rallies against transphobic elements in our society. And then on top of that, he expressed an opinion that supported Palestine. And what happened? He got reelected to his position on the QP National, and they passed an emergency resolution, which was the most radical resolution because it encompassed the item of education, and it passed overwhelmingly. And now the OFL, the largest trade labor association in Canada, has now adopted a very similar statement. So anyway, it's been years of work, and I think social media has played a huge role in all of this, particularly with young generations. And I just
Time.
Yeah, time.
Sorry. Thanks, Julius. Okay, so now we're going to go to, let's see. Who am I going to? Eric. Okay, Eric, you're on.
Thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Eric. I'm a Secretary Treasurer of QP 3906 at McMaster. I appreciated how both speakers talked about organizations or states or others who should be more supportive of Palestinian liberation in various ways, from the USSR to elements of the PLO and these sorts of things. So my question is, aside from BDS, as Ghada brought up, what other organizations, parties, or groups on the ground in Palestine or elsewhere in the Middle East could unions or other organizations more directly support? Or would you recommend that we support, given the sort of current state of the political situation there?
Okay, thank you, Eric. So now we're going to go back to our panel. We'll start with Ghada, and you have 4 minutes each to answer however many questions you wish.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I can tackle the Arab question. I mean, obviously it's a painful question, but I want to recommend 2 books on Palestine. These are my favorite books: The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. And my personal favorite is Palestinians, Peasants to Revolutionaries. And that was written by Rosemary Syed. It's from 1970s, but this book, it looks at Palestine pre-1948, and it really centers the voices of Palestinians, especially those who are in refugee camps in Lebanon, and their voices are frequently erased. But in both of these books, it really touches on how the Arab regimes have collaborated in a very hypocritical fashion since 1948. Jordan specifically, would secretly collaborate with Israel, really not, Jordan had quite the military power to take on Israel, and it didn't, right? It wanted a part of Palestine. And there's a lot of dirty politics, and I want to separate that from the people, though, because the people until now, through and through, they support Palestine. And we have been seeing, in Lebanon, they're burning the Israeli embassy. They're in Jordan, there were huge protests, and they the Jordanian king canceled his meeting with Biden, and because they're afraid. Yeah. Yeah. So they're definitely afraid of their people. We also recognize that a lot of it, especially the Gulf region, is highly authoritarian, right? These are regimes, like Saudi Arabia, that are highly supported by Canada and Israel and the USA. So it's all that is to say is I don't see Arab countries as all that different from here. I think the people there, of course, they strongly support Palestine. And we have to recognize that Israel is not just anti-Palestinian. I mean, it's invaded Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, until now, they occupied the Golan Heights. And it's they pose a security risk for the entire region, right? So yeah, I think obviously it's shameful on these Arab regimes that continue to remain silent and to suppress their grassroots, but I see definitely a lot of hope in the people they're organizing, just like we're organizing here. With regards to about what other organizations we can support. So actually, I did want to talk a bit about this parties and groups, because, for example, I have launched a petition a couple of weeks ago calling on MPs and MPPs to resign in solidarity with Palestine, including allies, actually, especially allies, because I believe personally that all 3 major parties, all 4 of them, are irredeemable. And I think that what we need to do is if we can have a group of independents like Sarah Jama, that's how we can kind of, challenge the status quo that is in the government. The NDP, when my brother and I and a bunch of us, we disrupted the NDP convention, when NDP delegates joined us, they revoked their passes, right? Like Jagmeet Singh, he's still very much supporting the Israeli regime, even though he's calling, for a military embargo, and they called it a genocide. They're, as we mentioned, like they've also expelled Sarah Jama for doing the bare, she's just for supporting Palestine. So what I'm asking actually is for MPs, if they were truly supporting Palestine, is to resign so they can become vocal advocates, like someone like Claire Daly in the European Union. She's an independent socialist and she's highly respected, has a huge following. So about Palestinian organizations, I know there was like the 4 that were targeted by Israel that I really respect, I think, including Ad-Damir, Adala. So these are organizations that you can follow and support. But yeah, I think there's a lot we could be doing here. Also, there's like Stop the JNF as a movement. You touched a bit on the JNF. For me, the JNF is like, it's like really, it is the precursor to Israel. It was founded in 1901 as a so-called, environmental group, but it actually was a colonial entity until now. The UN recognized it as a discriminatory institution, and its sole goal was to basically gain Palestinian land on behalf of Israel, because it's like a non-profit, so it's able to whitewash colonialism. And the JNF is still recognized as a charity by Canada. So that's really disgusting. I think we need to try to revoke the charitable status of JNF. Even CBC has exposed how a lot of, JNF funds went to the Israeli army. And so that's like, it was being audited by the CRA.
30 seconds.
So yeah, I think if we focus on JNF and also look at like donations, and we challenge groups like CIJA, B'nai B'rith, and all these lobby groups here, I think that would go a long way to keep it there.
Thank you, Comrade Barry. 4 minutes.
To Gary's question, can Arab leaders be pushed? They certainly can be, and they certainly should be, but it's going to take a very big sustained push. And that's why we are, inspired to see mass actions all around the world, across the Arab, Middle East and North Africa, but beyond that, millions of people, millions, almost close to 1 million in Jakarta, Indonesia, close to 1 million in London on more than one occasion, over 300,000 in the streets on several occasions. But yes, the Arab leaders can and should be pushed, and that's our hope, and that's up to the masses in the Arab countries to advance that perspective. We need to do all that we can in this country to support the general movement. That's why I read the clip from the Star about the oil boycott. Some of the governments that speak in favor of an oil boycott do so because they are subject to pressure. And perhaps they have no intention of actually doing it, but they feel obliged to press the neighboring Arab countries to do something. And at a certain point, this quantity will turn into the qualitative movement that is undeniable, and there will be a boycott, which will affect the allies of the Zionist state. Israel doesn't get much oil from those countries, the oil-rich countries in the Middle East, but the allies of Zionism, since they destroyed the pipeline between Russia and Germany, need more oil. And where are they going to find it? So an oil boycott is instrumental. Thank Julius for his remarks. Julius got 21% of the vote in running against the establishment at the OFL convention, and that's a damn good vote. And that follows on decades of work by us and our allies against the Zionist apartheid state, against all of the cruelties it has exacted on the Palestinian people and on many others. 21% of the vote at the OFL. And at the Ontario NDP Provincial Council meeting that took place yesterday, there was a motion to offer Sarah Jama her place back again in the NDP caucus of MPPs at Queen's Park, and it obtained 34%. In other words, in a body of about 200 delegates, half of whom are paid to carry out the NDP leadership line, over a third were prepared to disagree openly and buck the line emanating from the top. That means that there's work to be done. I would say the NDP is unlike the Conservatives, the Liberals, the Bloc Québécois, the Green Party, etc., in that it is based on the labor movement. And so I wouldn't raise this initiative in the Liberal Party. If some liberals want to do it, fine, let them go ahead. But for me, as a working class political activist, I do it in the NDP because it's different, because it's organically tied to the NDP. Now, whether we're fighting for Sarah Jama to be restored to the NDP caucus at Queen's Park, are we going to urge others to quit while we're urging that she be restored? Is there a momentum to create an independent caucus of MPs and MPPs purely on the basis of this issue? Well, when we see such a development, we'll be the first to endorse it, but we don't see that yet. Other organizations to support in the Palestinian movement. Well, in Canada, the Canadian Coalition for BDS is something to which Socialist Action is affiliated. A booklet that I recommend that you read is on the table there. Maybe Judy will uphold it. It's The Hidden History of Zionism. It's the orange booklet right near where Peter is sitting, right there. Yeah, you should buy a copy of that. It's what I based my speech on. And organizations in
30
Palestine,
seconds.
you know, the PFLP and the PDFLP are radical organizations, radical nationalist organizations that are doing important work. And Samidoun, which has been fighting for prisoners' rights, is another organization that deserves our support. But we need to build revolutionary working class parties in every country, including in Palestine and including in the Canadian state. And Socialist Action aspires to play that role here in building a revolutionary party that is for internationalism, it's for anti-capitalism on a global scale. Thanks.
I just wanted to add about Turkey, because I mentioned Arab countries and Turkey. You know, Erdogan portrays himself as this like Islamic savior, and he's like so pro-Palestine, and he's actually a huge hypocrite. Turkey is one of Israel's strong allies. You know, actually, speaking of oil, like from what I understand, Israel gets a lot of its oil from Azerbaijan, and Turkey allows, and Turkey could actually block that. Or Turkey, you know, they still, you know, cooperate militarily with Israel, and even there was this recent rally that I think he allowed in like an empty airport, but they actually like violently suppress Turkish protests in solidarity with Palestine. So I just want to stay aware how a lot of like the speech of, you know, these Muslim leaders is actually hypocritical. And you know, this is actually why we're also challenging a lot of the mosques here and Muslim institutions that are still accepting politicians. You can see here, like Muslim worshippers, they're like furious and they're rising up and saying, stop allowing these politicians into our mosques. You know, they're here to pretend that they're not Islamophobic and they're not racist, but they obviously are when they're failing to even call for a ceasefire, right? We saw Mayor Crombie and Trudeau and Panieva, all of them getting confronted. So we're seeing even a push here, right, against these like, you know, Muslim authorities and, you know, and so, yeah, I believe strongly in like the grassroots. Actually, I wanted to give just a big shout to my brother, Khaled. He has a page on Instagram called Pali Threads. And he does this, he does this, I don't know, segment called like Snake Saturdays. So yesterday he wrote it on Erdogan and how he's a snake. So like you can follow up with like all like the hypocrites. And yeah, I think we just need to keep calling out that hypocrisy.
For sure, for sure. Okay, so anybody in the room like to ask a question? Okay, if Carrie, anybody else online? I don't see anybody's hand up online. Ron's got his hand up too. Okay, so we're going to take two questions from the room. First, Ons and then Carrie. Beauty before age, I say.
Just it triggered on me the link between the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline and the fact that Qatar is one of the leading suppliers of LNG to gas-starved Europe right now. Qatar hosts Al Jazeera, which for me has been my source of this catastrophic information. So much so that I get depressed watching it. But you know, my mother during the war had to listen to BBC surreptitiously covering her radio on her head with a pillow while the bombing was going on. But with Al Jazeera feeding to many of the mainstream media what is actually going on in Gaza. And Barghouti, what's his name? Anwar Barghouti likened the bombing of Dresden to the bombing of Gaza, except that nobody was there to watch the bombing of Dresden while the world sees what's going on. And I just think that the dreadful imagery portrayed for anyone to see is really what is at the root of this tremendous anti-war mobilization. And I think that that will produce a political shift even in the Western world. But how do you explain Qatar getting away with it?
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to read a question and then we'll go to Carrie Farias. So there'll be 3 questions going to the panel. The question from the online, from Yasin T. A lot of Canadian citizens are passionate and motivated, especially now, to take action for Palestine. It seems unclear to individuals what to do to move the needle. How can we organize better to channel individual actions into meaningful change? Okay, so now we will go to Carrie and then back to the panel. Carrie, 3 minutes.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, so my question is, what can we do to expose this complicity? Let me give a background. Right now, Municipal Socialist Alliance is running a candidate in Scarborough Southwest Ward 20. His name is Corey David, who's one of our comrades. And he's out of the 23 candidates who's running in the election to get elected on November 30, they have nothing to talk about, nothing to say about Palestine. And only Corey has the courage to stand up and say, this is a genocide. It need to be stopped. So even after all these countless of evidence showing what's really going on, these current leaders who are running for leadership, they think it's okay to remain silent. So I'm trying to put it in a way that there's no neutrality in justice. So if likely one of these popular candidates is going to be get elected. So I'm concerned how they are going to represent people of Scarborough, because we have a large percentage of people in Scarborough who are nearly 78% are immigrants, and they are visible minority, and there's a good portion are directly connected to Palestinians. So how are they going to represent, the most oppressed communities in Scarborough if they're in this time, if they're going to be complicit? So so the question is, how do we expose this complicity? And how do we connect this to the mainstream so they understand we keep electing the complicit leaders? And this is a cycle of misery for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the panel, starting with Barry and then Ghada, and they have each up to 5 minutes to answer 1, 2, or 3 questions.
How does Qatar get away with it? They get away with it because the population is not yet at the throat of the leadership of that country, and we need to see more mass mobilizations. And it's important that these are broad, peaceful, and where, you know, people bring their whole families out to demonstrate, as we saw in Ottawa yesterday. That has to be the character of the United Front that confronts the leaders. They will feel the pressure, but it takes sustained mass mobilization to do it. And that will force the rulers of Turkey, and that will force the rulers right across the region to at least make different noises. Will it change their orientation towards the accumulation of profits? Not by itself, no. But out of these mass movements will come the future revolutionary parties that will overthrow the corporate regimes, the corporate-backed regimes in all these countries. It's the same answer to Yassine's question, how to move the needle for qualitative change. If you want qualitative change, you have to build revolutionary organizations which are dedicated to the fight for qualitative change. And it's no surprise that an organization such as ours, sponsoring this conference and many others before, is talking about Palestine where others will not. Why does Corey David in Scarborough Southwest, in the by-election in Ward 20, talk about Palestine while the other 20 candidates do not? It's because he's a socialist, because he's a revolutionary socialist and part of Socialist Action, which laid the basis for the Municipal Socialist Alliance, which laid the basis for the Workers' Action Movement that ran a candidate at the OFL, at the Ontario Federation of Labour Convention, for a top executive position, and which fights for class struggle policies, an end to concessions bargaining, for union democracy, for transparent negotiation process, for mobilizing the ranks for a general strike to dump Thug Ford, as the banner there states. That's not an accident. So if you enlarge the organizations which are committed to do what the NDP Socialist Caucus is doing, which again we helped to launch decades ago in fighting against the odious expulsion of Sarah Jama from the caucus at Queen's Park, then you're enlarging the capacity to win qualitative change. Only a revolutionary party is dedicated to doing that without compromise, sticking to basic principles and using all means available to it. Centered on United Front activity, centered on mass, peaceful, democratic mobilization in the streets. And if the authorities, try to provoke democratic opposition to the status quo, then the struggle will take its course. But we assert the right of the people to defend themselves by any means necessary in order to achieve justice, right? We don't initiate violence. We demonstrate democratically, peacefully, and we try to reach out to more and more people in the process. But the authorities are intolerant. They discriminate. They fire people from their academic positions simply for speaking out. They meet punishment on school trustees for doing the same. That's why we need to enlarge the revolutionary parties which are at the core of these movements, devoted to United Front mass peaceful demonstrations, actions against the establishment, but also fighting for system change, not climate change, system change. For homes, not drones. These are our slogans. These are the reasons why we are in the forefront of these movements. And that's what I commend all the people watching this conference today, wherever you may be. Join Socialist Action.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to respond to the point about Arab countries. So I was born in the United Arab Emirates, which is, part of the Gulf, and the Gulf is very similar in how authoritarian it is. And, people saw more recently how they've been collaborating. But as I've said, they've been collaborating since 1948. For example, my mom, she passed away several years ago, but when she was in university back in the 80s, she did theater. That's it. And the UAE police raided her apartment. They took her books, her CDs, right? So it's like, this has been ongoing. And I think up to the early 2000s, at least you would see like peaceful protests in the UAE. Now you don't even see protests, and it's because they're not allowed. UAE literally just started deporting people left and right? UAE is a country that I was born there, I don't have a citizenship. We don't have rights there, right? So that's again, this like ultra capitalist state that like, you know, it threatens just to remove people. And so this is, yes, yeah, exactly, modern day slavery. So yeah, that's why I think it's so important to see when you see like fireworks in Saudi Arabia, it's not because the people are happy. And I actually feel really bad for the people living, especially Palestinians. I can't even imagine what they're feeling, that they can't even like speak out against injustice. So I have a lot of empathy. And I think, yeah, just like more than ever, we as people need to come together. You know, we as Palestinians need to come together. Because even there is like, you know, there's factions, of course, and differences. And I just remind myself of how the Black Panthers really became a threat to the state when they began to bring together Black communities, and then even more so when they brought together white allies and other people. So I think this is the challenge right now that we need to work on, is like, how do we bring everybody together, you know, like, yes, PFLP and, you know, the DFLP, they're more like the leftist organizations, and we want to see a socialist Palestine, but also, you know, when you see Hamas on October 7th, they were able to break through the wall. I mean, it wasn't just Hamas, right? You saw Palestinians, everybody was just like, just really amazing. Like these people are just running. There's no like flip-flops. There's no like, you know, they could easily get sniped by the Israelis, and people are just so happy to be free, you know? That was just such an image that like captivated the world. And so in that moment, nobody's thinking, oh, is this Hamas? Is this TFLP? Is this, people are just thinking, as Palestine. I think that's what's so important right now. Like you said, we need to support Palestinian resistance, which is both moral and legal, right? International law recognizes occupying class people have the right to resist through all means necessary. And it's just disgusting that this is naturally understood when it comes to Ukraine, but for Palestine, it's not, right? Because we're brown and someone asked about Dresden compared to Gaza. And I actually want to talk a bit about this, that a lot of people realize that the word Nakba to describe, you know, what Palestinians have been going through because of Israel was actually coined in 1948 by Israel. When it was dropping leaflets in Haifa, it was threatening Palestinians to leave, or else we will, you know, shell your villages, we will break your backs. And it literally said, we're going to do the Nakba to you. Now, Nakba is an Arabic word that means catastrophe, but they're the first who used it in reference to Palestine. And actually, if you look into the Haganah archives, so Haganah is the precursor to the Israeli military, the Haganah actually translated Nakba to Holocaust. And so it's just really crazy that people now, you know, until now people argue, oh, when you compare the Nakba to the Holocaust, this is anti-Semitism, when actually from the beginning of Israel, that's literally their intent. So this is why when I say, like, yes, of course, it's an economic dimension, but just like the Holocaust, when we understand it as a largely white supremacist issue, this is how we need to understand Palestine. This is a largely white supremacist genocidal issue, which is, yeah, it's hard to wrap our minds like, why, right? Like, why do Israelis just like kill, like, but like, that's it, like settler colonialism exists to kill. I mean, even here, we're seeing a slow genocide against indigenous people. And, you know, and that's why, like, when I Don't Know More started here, like Palestinians in Gaza and like in Palestine were the first to, you know, protest in solidarity. We understand that pain. And I think I wanted to also touch just a little bit on like indigo. I think it was so disgusting. I don't know if you heard, but I learned more details yesterday. So like the Canadian police, I guess, they raided the homes of people who literally just put up posters on the indigo store. Shame. And actually, they literally raided them in the middle of the night. Like a woman woke up with a flashlight in her face. And it's just, it reminds me of the Israeli army that, you know, this so-called like country about, you know, free speech. And, you know, when we talk about like, how do we rally the everyday Canadian? I think that's the way to do it. It's like, we're all in this together, you know, we have to understand our interconnectedness and what people can be doing. I mean, I already touched about this before, but I think I want to emphasize, like, obviously right now, what we need mostly is a permanent ceasefire, and then we want to free Palestine. But also what Palestinians have been saying is for people outside of Palestine, the biggest way you can help is through BDS. So we have to try to pressure whatever we can, just like to advance this movement, right? So again, look into your own workplaces, your, you know, talking to your friends, like, you know, there's like stickers. You're always welcome to also contact me on like Twitter or my email. You know, you can find me online. There's Toronto for Palestine, Palestine Youth Movement. There's like a lot of groups that you can reach out to, but yeah, like always, I'm happy to speak to people.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I see no other questions online or in the chat. This is the last chance, comrades. Anybody in the room? Had a question? Okay, well, while you're thinking about it for a second, just want to also let everybody know that we are also streaming this on YouTube. And if you could like and share the stream, it would help us reach out further. So thanks in advance for that, because it will be on YouTube so people can watch it at a later time. Okay, so we're going to take one last question. Julius?
Just an announcement.
Announcement, okay.
See on the side here that there's a table picture. If you don't have any cash, but you'd like to buy something, we can accept the card.
Okay, pause for the cause. Okay, so I will give our panelists, if they wish, if it's something they've forgotten to say or wish to say, I'll give them a couple of minutes each to do that. We'll start with Ghada and then Barry.
I want to mention actually that today there's going to be a protest at, as it called, Davenport demands permanent ceasefire now. And it's a rally outside MP Julie Sherwood's office. Sorry, Sherwood's office. Yes. So it's a Liberal Party fundraiser, and there's actually going to be one of the ministers is going to be there. So yeah, this is at 6 p.m. It's at 1621 DuPont Street or Casa de Madera. So I'm just really happy to see that in every time there's politicians right now, people are organizing, you know, there's like no business as usual. Anytime politicians are there, we're going to be confronting them. So yeah, I guess in general, I mean, thank you for listening and being part of this conversation. And yeah, I'm looking forward to organize more for Palestine.
Someone from the Palestine Youth Movement called me yesterday on the telephone and said that I should pass along this announcement. There will be a rally on Wednesday at the entrance to the Sid Smith building, and then a march to Convocation Hall. I don't know whether it's to demand that the University of Toronto divest from investment in Israel, the Zionist state, but anyone in a position to participate, meet at the front steps of Sid Smith Hall. I think it's 100 St. George on Wednesday, and then be prepared to walk over to Convocation Hall, which is not far. That's the administrative center of the university. And, you know, I want to thank Ghada for coming and participating with us here. It's difficult to navigate the streets of Toronto if you're from Hamilton. But you made it, and this is a discussion that needs to happen on a wider and wider scale. We need to collaborate. We need to work together to defeat the Zionist propaganda machine, to call out the hypocrisy of the Justin Trudeau government. The foreign affairs minister and the defense minister are captives of NATO, completely subordinate to Washington's politics, but not subordinate because they're a colony, but subordinate because they have a common interest as profiteers, as exploiters. And that's how we see them. We need to deal with our ruling class because it is complicit, you know, subjecting people to misery for the sake of the profit system. So if we're going to eradicate the profit system, we need to be active on all fronts, including in the mass labor party, including in our unions, including in all of our mass organizations. And most of all, and I emphasized this a moment ago, we need to build larger and larger revolutionary organizations in every country so that we can target the system that is destroying the environment, that is undermining civil liberties, that is making accommodation an impossibility for a whole generation of young workers, and that is fomenting permanent war, the never-ending wars that plague humanity, and that could be the end of humanity if there's a nuclear confrontation. So the key thing for us in Socialist Action is to build a revolutionary party, a revolutionary working class organization that will not stop at changing the system itself, as well as fighting for justice every day in every way that we can. Thanks.
Just wanted to ask, actually.
Sure.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I just wanted to add.
Go ahead.
So I wanted to add just a point I wanted to say earlier about the NDP. The NDP actually has a lot of power because they can end their, collaboration with the Liberal government. They have put their line as, in the recent convention as pharmacare, like they're not gonna, they're gonna break off well, apparently genocide of like 15,000 Palestinians is not enough for that to be aligned with the NDP party. So, you know, with all my respect, I hold the NDP highly complicit in the genocide too. And I believe that they're irredeemable. And my friend, Jessa McLean, like she talks a lot about, as someone who's like really been involved in the party, she echoes a lot of my views, but I think this is why I'm calling on MPs to resign solidarity with Palestine, which might seem like a radical action, but you know what? This is the time for radical action. Like we just saw 30 city councillors in the UK and an MP, they resigned from the Labour Party, right? In solidarity with Palestine. And so, yeah, I wanted to say that also, you know, there's the Canada-Palestine Friendship Group, and it's headed by Salma Zahid, who is Muslim. And I just want to say it was really disgusting that, you know, this fall I was supposed to go to Parliament. I wish Palestine, Parliament to like speak about Ahmed Manassa to the friendship group, just a presentation. They canceled on me just a couple of days before, ghosted me. And then when I spoke about it on Twitter after they, you know, didn't get back to me, email, call, she blocked me on Twitter. So it's just like, it's just really disgusting that this so-called Canada-Palestine Friendship Group, which has, you know, it's led by three co-chairs, right? Elizabeth May, Aysel Boulhis from the NDP, and then Salma Zahid. This so-called friendship group is, for me, a fraud. They're not actually centering Palestinian voices. They're pretending to be with Palestine and, you know,
30 seconds.
ghosting and disrespecting us. So I just want to say, yeah, like we need to really amplify our fight against the politicians. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so the question period is over. We've come to the end of this session. I want to thank all 32 that was online listening, and of course, everybody in the room. Thanks to Carrie, our technical producer, to our camera crew and reporters over there. Thank you very much for being here. And of course, a special thanks to our panelists. Okay, so stay tuned for the next session that will take place at 4, starting at 4. And the panel's topic is what is pre-revolutionary situation? And our speakers is Gary Porter from
Closer to the mic.
oh, sorry. Yes, so the next panel on the topic is what is pre-revolutionary situation? Our speaker is Gary Porter from the West Coast, and Flo Sherrod from Northern British Columbia, and John Riddell here in Toronto. So see you all back at 4, comrades, for sure. And sorry about all the glitches in the beginning, but I think we've worked them all out, so the next session should run a lot smoother, and you won't have such a nervous chair. Thanks.